Joining me now with reaction to my interview with Cardinal Burke and more is the Papal Posse in our first ride of 2022, Editor-in-Chief of the Catholic Thing, Robert Royal, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD Murray. Thank you both for being here. Gentlemen, the big takeaways for you in that interview. Father Jerry, then Bob, very quickly.
Well, his Cardinal Burke's defense of the Latin Mass, the fact that this really is an injustice to people who are very devoted to the Church. Regarding the Order of Malta, it would be a grave error for the Holy See to ask them to suppress their sovereignty. There's no clear reason why that needs to be done. And then, of course, it's so great to have Cardinal Burke back and see him healthy, and we have continued to pray for his recovery.
Bob, your shot.
Yeah, when I try to think of all those things together, the question that is put to me is one, it's a phrase that the Pope has used. He says, we want unity, but not uniformity. And the moves against the Latin Mass, against Ad Orientem in Chicago, this kind of diminishment or perhaps abolition of the independence of the sovereign order of Malta, all these things seem to me to be much more about unifying, about uniformity, rather than the kind of spiritual unity. So something is, it's a general thing that's going on in the Church. And I think that one thing seems to thread various needles that all kind of fit together.
I want to dig deeper into this controversy over the motu proprio, Guardians of Tradition, and the situation in Chicago. This Father Anthony Bush, who is a pastor of St. Stanislaus Parish, he wrote a letter challenging Cardinal Cupich's cancellation of the Latin Mass in his parish after requesting permission from his local bishop to offer the Mass ad orientem in his parish. He had said that he will comply with the Cardinal's directive, but he went on to write, the Archbishop does not provide evidence that ad orientem was abrogated at the Second Vatican Council. As I read Sacrosanctum Concilium and the Roman Missal, the implication is ad orientem was not abolished or prohibited. On the contrary, liturgists, prelates, priests, religious had a glorious time at the council, taking liberties to change the face of the Church. Many faithful Catholics are being cruelly demoralized, thrown into confusion, which is something the Pope admittedly takes joy in, and are purposely being pushed to the fringe. There will be no place for our voices in the so-called Synod on Synodality. This is something we know for certain. Bob, what do you make of that letter?
Well, I'm glad that he said this, actually, because as we've said many times, many things are said about Vatican II that are not in the documents at all. We've said, for example, several times that Latin is recommended in that document. It's not abolished, so that the move against the traditional Latin Mass is kind of strange. I actually looked back at the document this week, and I searched the document. There's nothing about ad orientem or east or west, so there's just nothing that is regulative about ad orientem. And I want to just read quickly the three passages that I think are very interesting. And since we say all the time that the document doesn't say what people say it says, it's important to get these exact words. Section 36, particular law remaining in force, the use of the Latin language is to be preserved in the Latin rites. Section 54, nevertheless, steps should be taken, nevertheless, because there's also going to be some vernacular. Steps should be taken so that the faithful may also be able to say or to sing together in Latin those parts of the ordinary of the Mass which pertain to them. Then, of course, there's an affirmation of Gregorian chant. That's what the documents of Vatican II say. If somebody wants to object on other grounds, well, fine. That can be argued. But this constant use of Vatican II is sort of a touchstone, when in fact the documents don't support what people are saying about it. To me, it just seems to me to reveal that something else is going on rather than this unity under the umbrella of Vatican II.
No, it's a distortion of Vatican II and its intention. Father Jerry, following the letter that this Father Bush wrote, that was published on his website. He was summoned to meet with Cardinal Cupich, and hours later, he posted a new letter online. In the new letter, Bush expressed his deep-felt sorrow over that January 13th letter, and he said it was interpreted by social media as though I was being unjustly critical or disrespectful or lambasting the Holy Father or the Cardinal. And he goes on to write about the canon 1373 that, carries interdicts and penalties for stirring up dissent in a diocese. Now, Father Bush also noted he's been accused by the Archdiocese of possibly violating canon 1369, okay? Acquaint us with this, Father Jerry. You as a canonist, what do you make of the letter and Cardinal Cupich's response? And has he violated those canons?
Well, I looked at those canons. He's not violated them. He's not stirred up disobedience or hatred toward his ordinary. You have the freedom, according to Canon 212, to express publicly your view of things in the Church in order to promote the mission of the Church. Now, as regards Cardinal Cupich forbidding ad orientem Mass anywhere in his diocese, well, I note that the canons of St. John Cantius announced this previous week that they would continue to celebrate the Mass ad orientem. So apparently they got a permission from Cardinal Cupich that this other priest doesn't get. I don't understand why the selectivity there. The further question which Cardinal Burke raised, and this goes back to Cardinal Sarah back in 2016, Cardinal Sarah said quite clearly, there is nothing in the Church documents or law that forbids Mass said ad orientem. Therefore, what the Church allows, the local churches cannot forbid. So I think this is unfortunate that Father Bush's attempt to defend what is good in and of itself is being used as a means to accuse him of trying to stir up hatred against the bishop. Disagreeing with your bishop is not a form of hatred. In fact, it's a form of charity because you're trying to tell him, we think the truth requires another way of looking at this.
Gentlemen, I'm pressed for time. I only have about 10 minutes here. I want to move on to the issue of the Vatican's vaccine mandate. Ed Penton at the National Catholic Registers reported that Pope Francis met twice with the Pfizer CEO, Albert Bourla, at the Vatican. Now, Bob, what do you make of this meeting with this Pfizer CEO? And does that taint in any way the Vatican's advocacy for not only vaccines, but the Pfizer vaccine in particular? Very quickly.
Yeah, I think that the Vatican has created a suspicion about itself here that need not have happened. I mean, we don't know what happened between Mr. Bourla is his name. He's Jewish, so he was not hearing Bourla's confession or counseling him spiritually. I think the Vatican could have just simply let it be known that the Pope had met with him. Maybe it was an innocent thing. Maybe they were talking about the need for vaccines and how can they be promoted and what's coming down the line. But by not even mentioning in the official record of who's meeting with the Pope, and Bourla met with him twice without this being mentioned. As I say, I think it just creates a suspicion where if this was innocent, there was no need to do so.
Father Jerry, the Register has also reported that Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin, I alluded to this earlier, and his deputy Edgar Peña-Parra have both tested positive for COVID. Now, we should mention both men received 2 doses and a booster. Parolin is responsible for having signed into force this restrictive vaccine mandate for all the Vatican staff. He also, you'll remember last week, said that there really is no reason to object on moral grounds to taking the vaccine, and he particularly mentioned Pfizer, which is, of course, the only vaccine available in the Vatican, the one they've been pushing. Does the reality of the situation undermine confidence not only in the utility of these mandates, but in the arguments being put forward surrounding them?
Well, let's clear up a couple of things. Of course, the Vatican did issue a document last year saying that it was morally licit to use the various vaccines because the involvement of the development and testing of those vaccines with the aborted baby's tissue was only remote. It didn't involve sinful behavior. So you can take the vaccine, but the Vatican also said you're not forced to take the vaccine. Now, what happens is, as time develops, the Holy See has gotten more restrictive, and they won't let people who have a religious objection you can object, for instance, to the fact that it's developed or tested with the aborted baby's flesh by saying we're going to boycott this in order to make the point that Pfizer should stop using that tissue of aborted children and use other means to test its products. So that thing should be said. Also, what about the people of natural immunity from having had it already, the COVID? Scientists keep showing us that that form of acquired immunity is often better than the one you get from the vaccines. All of this leads to the conclusion that saying right out, no Vatican employee can get an exemption on religious bases, is treating this in a simplistic way that is not, in fact, in line with the developing knowledge we have about how COVID is transmitted and then treated, and then how we protect ourselves.
Yeah, no, I'm a bit shocked at the ignorance and the ignoring of science and its evolution in this COVID crisis. Breaking news this week regarding Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. The Associated Press and others are reporting that a sex abuse report coming out of the Diocese of Munich, Germany, faults then Archbishop Joseph Ratzinger for mishandling cases of abuse while leading the diocese from 1977 to 1982. Attorney Martin Pusch had this to say, and he says, in a total of 4 cases, we have come to the conclusion that the then Cardinal Ratzinger is to be accused of misconduct regarding cases of sexual abuse. 2 of these cases involved acts of abuse committed during his tenure and sanctioned by the state under criminal law. In both cases, the perpetrators remained active in pastoral care without explicit restrictions on their activities. The report also lays blame at the feet of current Archbishop Cardinal Reinhard Marx. Archdiocese officials committed, commissioned this report nearly 2 years ago, and covers the period from 1945 to 2019. Bob, your thoughts on the timing? Why is this coming now?
Yeah, this is a story about things that happened at least 40 years ago, and maybe even a little bit longer than that. So it does raise some question of why bring this up now. We know that, generally speaking, the secular world does not like figures like then Cardinal Ratzinger. But I think we ought to move slowly about this and find out more details about what actually happened, because there were 4 cases in the course of those 5 years that he was Cardinal Archbishop of Munich. Munich freezing is actually called. One seems to have been external, another one seems to have some iffy status. And then there are 2, and we don't know. I mean, we're talking about the early 80s when the abuse situations were not as clear as they are today. A lot of bishops here in the United States were told by psychologists, psychiatrists, and whatnot that people could be treated and that they could be cured. So I think we want to know more about this. I don't think we want to exonerate the former pope, but it seems to me that this is really a late hit on somebody who elsewhere in his life has been very vigorous in dealing with priestly abuse of young people.
And Pope Emeritus Benedict is denying wrongdoing here. It is unclear whether he fully even knew about these cases, Father Jerry, or at least 2 of them. The accusations are directed at the handling of abuse cases in which these perpetrators were punished but remained in pastoral work, I guess, after their incarceration or whatever happened. What are the canonical issues at play here, particularly in that period of the late 70s, early 80s?
Well, the canonical issue is, did the bishop use responsible criterion for enforcing canon law, for enforcing the moral law, and prudence in assigning priests who have a history of sexual abuse crimes to carry out pastoral work? I direct our listeners to the Wall Street Journal story today, and I agree with Bob. We should look at this thing very carefully. The Wall Street Journal has a story about this, which it details allegedly what Pope Benedict said in his approximately 90-page submission to this commission. So the commission asked him questions. He sent him a document, and one of the lawyers characterizes what he said, and it's very disturbing because it recounts, I would think, according to how I see it, a misappreciation of the potential for harm by a man who's committed gross immorality in the presence of minors. So the canon law issue is that bishops are responsible for which priests they authorize to work in their diocese. I would encourage Pope Benedict and his assistant, Archbishop Genschwein, has said he will issue a response. He should immediately publish his 90-page document so that we can, based on what he said, not what a lawyer characterizes as that, and then questions should be taken from the media. Because, if we're going to grill every other cardinal as accused, unfortunately, the Pope Emeritus is subject to that similar scrutiny. And not unfortunate, it's justice requires it. It's unfortunate that, of course, anything that happened in the past could possibly have been covered up. We hope that's not the case here. The Pope says he didn't know about one case. Let's see what happens.
No, I agree with you, but I also agree, and I think we're all in agreement, transparency of all these cases is what we need. I think we need to know, what did Pope Benedict do or did not do when he was bishop? We know what he did as CDF head. There were over 3,000 cases that, men who were laicized because of their actions, and that was largely through his work. But I also think the current Pope's record also needs to be made transparent. The cases of Bishop Sanchetta, Father Grassi in Argentina, there are lingering questions there as well. So I don't want to only go to the deep past. We also have to look at the present as well and have transparency across the board. Before we go, very quickly, gentlemen, I want to get your reflections on the life and legacy of Catholic philosopher Professor ALICE von Hildebrand, who passed away this week at the age of 98. Lily was a friend, a mainstay here on EWTN, more than 80 appearances. She hosted her own series on EWTN, appeared on Mother Angelica's show. Your quick comments on her. I'll start with you, Father Jerry. You knew her. She was a parishioner in I believe your family's parish in New York.
Yes, the parish I grew up in, she was a member. I remember Dietrich von Hildebrand and Alice sitting in front of us at Mass in the early 70s. Yeah, she was an extraordinary figure because she was totally devoted to the truth. As a philosopher, as a theologian, as a spiritual guide. She's written beautiful books on marriage, on the meaning of femininity. She's also a big supporter of the traditional Latin Mass, precisely because, based on her acquaintance with her husband's ideas, she understood that reverence is one of the central categories of human existence. If you're going to be right with God and your neighbor, you have to have a reverential spirit. And she saw, as I think Cardinal Burke was saying earlier, the reverence promoted by the traditional Latin Mass is a gateway to spiritual riches and to heavenly insights. So yeah, she is a model of what it means to be a Catholic woman, totally devoted to the Lord in the Church.
Bob, your final thoughts on the lasting legacy of ALICE von Hildebrand, particularly in the realm of Catholic thought, feminism, given her experiences fleeing Europe at the beginning of World War II and meeting her husband Dietrich?
Yeah, in secular terms, we talk about the greatest generation, meaning the people who, the men and women who helped us defeat Nazism and Japan in World War II. She belongs to that period, and let's pray to God that that's not the last of the great generations that we see. I mean, she was able to be intellectually productive, fearless, as both of them were, in standing up to Hitler and to other things. And so after you've seen Hitler and Stalin and those monsters of the early and middle part of the 20th century, they came to the controversies and the struggles and the battles, frankly, that we now have to fight with a great deal of courage and experience, that things could get very bad here. And that even added more to the fidelity and the desire for truth that Father was talking about. And let's hope that we see more like them in future generations.
Yeah, no, she was a real warrior and a great lady. ALICE von Hildebrand, rest in peace. Gents, we're going to have to leave it there. For commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, you can visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you, gentlemen.